She wasn't the kind of mom you'd find on a Mother's Day card. She didn't give me a lot of hugs. She didn't take care of me closely when I was sick. She would try. I got soup and water. She didn't sit beside me in the bed. And for a long time, that version of my mother confused me greatly. What I didn't know then was that one day I would spend years learning just how deeply this woman truly loved me. Welcome to week 2 of The Girl in Ashes. We're going to try it with some headphones and the mic today to give some professional clarity to my words. I ended episode 1 with a very strong statement that said, before I was trying to keep my dad alive, I was trying to keep my mother alive. And before that, before the impact, she was my mom. But before she was my mom, she was a teenage girl swinging her leg in church, enticing a boy that she was pretending to ignore. And he just couldn't stop looking at her. And I think maybe that's where we should begin this story. My mother was born in Georgia, but raised in Florida. She was the oldest daughter of a holiness Pentecostal pastor. A pastor's kid, like myself. A little bit different upbringing. She was her daddy's favorite. And she was always looking for the next laugh, the next adventure, and the next lightest, brightest, and greatest thing. Let's take a journey together. Picture this, a young teenage girl sitting in her father's church, listening to a message. Legs crossed, shaking her leg, she notices a very handsome, young, blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy. He's noticing her. She's noticing him. At this moment in her life, she is in her typical teenage years, and she is secretly listening to her headphones and her music that her father just would not approve of with her older brother when they're sitting at home. There was no TV show or anything of that to watch. When she was at home, she would go off into her mental adventures and think about romance. Love songs were her favorite, the old-timey ones from the 50s. She loved Elvis. She was one of the fans, secretly, even though her father would not have approved. And in that moment, she caught the attention of a boy that would soon become a huge impact to her life. She didn't know it. She was still in her rebellious stage. So even though she knew she had his attention, she knew she had the power, she purposely tested him. One of the stories that they shared is that after a Sunday morning service, she got into a sports car of another fellow in their teenage youth group and rode off with him in front of this other boy. How dare she? But that was an example of her spirit. It was a challenge. If you wanted her, come get her. If you really liked her, prove it. She knew who she was, even though she battled insecurities. She would often say she wasn't popular in school and that she was shy and backwards and weird and people didn't understand her. But she lived in a home with a father who was a great man. She was his favorite, but very strict, very OCD. And a mother who didn't know how to mother. She was a great woman, but in the stories that my mother shared, my grandmother would make dresses for them, get food for them, but there was no affection from her in that home. My mother often talked about she felt like her mom didn't even like her. So in those teenage years, laying in that room, that boy that she met in church started making phone calls. He knew what he wanted to, and that was her. There was something about her that stood out to him above anybody else that he had ever met. Yes, they were young. He was 15 when he spotted her, and he started calling her. The one thing she would tell me all the time that stood out, that made him different, that put him above the rest, was that he was always making her laugh. If you tuned into episode 1, you will know that this boy is my father. They were each other's first true love and first in everything. For a year and some change, they dated, and they would go on these exciting adventures. They would go play softball together. Yes, my mother would do that. She rode horses at one point. They would go have dinner. They would hang out at each other's houses. They would hang out a lot with her older brother. And they got to know each other. But the thing that she said over and over, two things that stood out, was he made her laugh and he would not stop. But this is not his story. This is her story. So, after a year and some change, she marries that boy. And when they get married, she thinks, finally, I'm free. I'm out of the confines of my father's pastoral leadership and his strict rules, and I can go be free with my new husband. Little did she know that my dad was called into ministry, and she has now transitioned from a pastor's daughter to a pastor's wife. It is hilarious to me because she so desperately wanted to get out of that environment. But honestly, it was on her from the beginning. A calling, one might say. There was no getting away from it. And I don't think she regrets 1 minute of falling in love with the boy she met in the church service at her father's church. My mother loved children. When she would share stories of her past, she would talk about how badly she wanted to have children of her own. Something about it made her want to experience unconditional love, and she felt like that was the best way to reach that. My father loved her unconditionally, but he worked all the time, and when they first got married, it was just them hanging out in a trailer, and so when he would go to work, she just hung out. So she decided to start babysitting. She did that for a while. Fast forward, 7 years it took for her to get pregnant with my sister. So her firstborn, 7 years into their marriage, she finally has a baby girl of her own. But she didn't realize at the time, and most people didn't at the time, that postpartum was a real thing. And my mother, obviously coming out of a home where she didn't know what a motherly figure was like, now has a child of her own, also a daughter, and it is premature and it is traumatic, and she does not bond, and she goes through postpartum and has no idea what is going on. In the midst of that, they're in ministry. A young couple doing youth work at their current church, being a Sunday school superintendent, working in ministry, working hard to build something sustainable for the family, and now introducing a baby to two 20-something-year-olds that just are like, what is happening? It's kind of funny to me when I used to hear the stories, because I can only imagine. We think about that today and we think, ugh, that was so young and that was so much going on. And it was. But when my older sister was coming close to 5 years old, or just turned 5 years old, somewhere around that pivotal moment, so 5 years after their first baby, my father tells my mother, I want to pastor. God has called me to the pastorship. And she says to him, and they both told this story, she said, well, God didn't call me to be a pastor's wife. I don't think she really understood the concept of two becoming one at that point in her life, but it always makes me laugh thinking about that. She's like, he didn't call me. She loved the church she was going to. She loved the ministry they were in. They had a huge youth group, a huge young adult group. She had her baby there. They were doing fine. Why are we uprooting to start something from nothing? Again, back in episode 1, we talk about where those beginnings started in rubbles and ashes that my father saw vision for. But my mother, on the other hand, just saw the rubble and the ashes. One thing about her is she definitely could not see beyond right now. There's rubble here. What are you talking about that this is going to be the next place we minister? Sir, let me get back into my pew in my youth group. Okay. That was her mentality. But no matter what, she stood by his side, his wild ideas, his business, his ministry, whatever it was that he was going to do. She may have kicked and screamed along the way, but she supported it. Now, my mother was definitely not a polished church lady, not by any means. She was loud, emotional, dramatic. She struggled with so many things of trying to understand. She'd fly off the cuff in a minute. But deep down, she was the biggest giver. I really think, honestly, her love language was gift giving and just giving in general. She would give you the very last penny she had, the shirt off of her back. You would never really find my mother embracing me during an emotional moment, hugging me when I got home from school, anything of that nature. But you would find her cutting the crust off of my sandwiches because I didn't like it, getting the specific fruit roll-ups that I wanted because that would make me happy, writing a little note in my lunchbox that says, "You're going to do great today," and then forgetting the rest of the week that she was going to write a note because things got a little too out of hand. So just one note at a time. She was highly unfiltered and oftentimes would find her mouth running to embarrass her. And when she got embarrassed, she would laugh so hard she would turn beet red. But her laugh was so infectious because once she started laughing, like really belly laughing, nobody else could not laugh. Like you're gonna start laughing with her. It's just gonna happen. Couldn't get her away from it. Even if you were the most biggest sourpuss, there was something about her belly laugh. But in all those characteristics, one thing that I can say about my mother is that she was a woman of faith. And when we talk about a woman of faith, I might find myself with a little bit of an emotion because I don't often talk about my mother. I'm just going to be honest. I was a daddy's girl through and through. He was my hero. I stood by his side. I wanted to be him, all those things. I didn't talk about her much because it took years to understand her. But a woman of faith, I never doubted that. There were so many stories that they shared with me that I love, that I think will resonate. My mother's faith was so strong that both she and my dad used to tell this story. There was one time in their house that the kitchen window broke. My mother believed that if she prayed for that window, God would bring the glass pieces back together. And she did. She prayed about it. It didn't happen. And to you, that may sound crazy, but it really wasn't. We're talking about someone who had seen miracles with her own eyes. She had been to conferences where blinded eyes were open. She had seen skin cancers fall off of people. She had been in prayer services that the spirit was so strong she couldn't even move. She had watched her own daughter, her firstborn, get a spider bite and her father lay hands on it and it be gone. The infection, the fever, the things that were out of her control. She had lived through moments that were unexplainable to prove that the God she loved was the God of impossibilities. Even to the very home that they lived in. My father they lived in a trailer when they first got together, and my father saw a home that he really wanted. He prayed and fasted, and she did too. In that prayer and fasting, God moved, and they were able to get that home. He only had to pay like $1, I think it was. It's still standing today. It's actually the very home I live in. I live in the middle of a miracle that my parents prayed for. But one of those strengths was a woman who believed God can do anything. There's many times that she sat around and said in financial distress, if I pray about it, God will answer. And that very week, they would get a check to the exact penny for an overpayment they didn't know about, insurance claim they didn't know about, that would cover that very bill that she laid before the God she believed in. If my mother ever spent time in prayer and felt like that her prayer was heard, she would confidently go back and tell the person, just believe. Multiple times in my life when my father would be weak, she was the helpmate. When I would struggle with health issues as a kid, she was the prayer warrior. In the moments when I would find myself stricken with anxiety, she would come into the room and lay hands on me. She had strong faith. And she taught me a lot of things. She was funny, man, and wild. But she taught me that there's nothing impossible with God. That was her strongest belief. And to have two powerhouse people, someone who said, we can rebuild anything from ashes, and connected with someone who says we have a God who will do anything, because I am witness. It paints a picture of a building block of where we end up. That was the real foundation. That's the foundation I grew up in. Nothing was perfect. Of course, everybody's human. She had her moments. She said things that probably were a little unhinged. There was a lot that I didn't understand because, like I said, she wasn't a hugger. She wasn't affectionate. And some of the things that she would say to me that have been resonated as like trauma as a kid, really she said them thinking she was doing the right thing. She had trauma in her own childhood that she needed therapy for, that she needed to start a podcast to talk about. And she didn't do those things. A lot of times in her life, she could have been something so more and dealt with things so much better if she did not let fear get a hold of her. Yes, I did say she was a woman of faith. That's absolutely true. But in her regular everyday life, she was also a woman of fear. Man, if she could stop fearing, she could have probably moved mountains in real life. But she never addressed her traumas. She never really figured out why she felt the way that she did. She was just different. Dad was the comforter, and she was the gift giver. It took me years to realize that she was loving me the best way that she knew how. I'd like to say with any mother-daughter relationship, there comes a time when there's a shift. And maybe you've experienced this, maybe you haven't. But yes, she said a lot of hurtful things when I was a kid. But she wasn't a bad person. It wasn't out of meanness, it was just out of learning. But when I started probably in my late teens, there was a shift that happened with my mother, and I kind of started becoming her friend. Not in a way where like we're going out and partying together in any way, shape, or form, but in a way where she felt like she could trust me and talk to me about things that were going on in her own life. In fact, she'd ask me questions about life that she never got to learn because there was no one teaching her. And it was really funny because she would definitely tell me that I was my father's child. But the funny thing about that is that was the man she loved with her whole heart. And now she has an offspring that she feels like is just like him. Okay. Maybe she loves me a little deeply too. Okay. But she was so proud of me. And as I moved into my 20s, I went back to school and I finally graduated with my bachelor's degree. And she was so proud. And let me be honest, my whole life I struggled with feeling like I wasn't good enough and feeling like I was never making them proud. It was a weird dynamic. They were great people, absolutely. And I'm like telling a story where y'all are probably like, wow, you had really good parents. Absolutely. But again, we weren't perfect. And through all of the things that we were going through, that we seen, that we worked for, especially being a pastor's kid, I always felt not good enough. And I'm going to be honest, as a little tidbit jumping up to the future, I still don't feel good enough. I don't know that I ever will. A lot of that comes from the church raising that I was under and the legalism that we were taught. A lot of it came from inside the house. In an environment where they wanted us to strive to do our best. Maybe we were left feeling like we always came up short. So when I went back to get my bachelor's degree, it was so amazing to me to see how proud she was. Now, she would tell me, like in passing, oh, I'm proud of you. Keep going. Don't quit. But it wasn't deep. You know where it was deep? She would post on Facebook. She would post these long posts about how proud she was of me and how she's so grateful that God gave me as her daughter. She would talk about how I help in ministry, how I help in the home, on my birthdays, on special occasions, but I watched her tell people in a bragging way that I graduated with honors, that I was a manager at my job. In my mid-20s, I became her best friend. And she started telling others how proud she was. It was to the point where she would call me at work. I'd be at work and almost daily, she would call me at work on my work phone. And then as soon as I answered, she'd go, are you busy? I just need to tell you about your daddy. And I'd be like, I am busy, but go ahead, tell me about it. Well, he did this and he did that. And she would just go off about everything. And then I'd have to talk off the list. Well, you know, he's probably stressed about this job and he's probably thinking this. And I'm just going to tell you what I know that he's thinking. And I would explain it to her because, of course, he and I were two of a kind. So I could understand his frustration and his stress. And she'd get off the phone ranting with me and then go eat something sweet and sit on her rocking chair, her recliner, and watch her soaps because that was how she de-stressed. That was her therapy. But every day she would call. And I knew immediately when she called it was going to be something about Dad. And for 20 minutes I'd hear all about it. And again, the older I got, the more I realized what was behind the title of my mother. She was just human. Like, sometimes I think we look at our parents and we forget that they were just like us, floating around this world wondering what to do next. How are we making it through? What are we doing? And then just raising random humans. That's really the gist of it. And It was great. It was great. I miss it. Those phone calls were great. I had no problem being her best friend, her sounding board, and the person she would tell even intimate details to. I probably know more about my parents than I really desired to know, but I didn't mind. I'll be my girl. I'll be my hype girl for my mama. That was where I was. Mid-20s. She was using me as her best friend, and I was down for it. In 2015, we find ourselves in a shift. A big shift, actually. My mother faced a health scare that she never wanted and that she prayed hard against. And she had to have open heart surgery. Dramatic, right? It wasn't easy, and it wasn't what we wanted to hear. We had prayed hard about it. We wanted a different result. We knew they were going to go check. She goes in for a heart cath, and we don't get the answers we want. It's not good news. She's going to have open heart surgery. Something we had prayed against, something she had desperately wanted to not have happen. So she goes through the surgery. It is not easy. It is not smooth. So again, we stand in a visual shift. This funny, call me daily, faith-filled woman is in a hospital room in ICU. My sister, me, my dad, and my dad is a mess. Now, you may think, oh no, is this where it ends? No, did not end in 2015. She came out of it. She did. She came out of it. It wasn't the greatest recovery. It wasn't easy. But she did heal. And she came out of it. She did really well. Changed her lifestyle for a while. Lost some weight. Got a little stronger. Got a little more confidence back. We took some trips. We had some fun, and my mama was back. So, back to my daily calls, the complaints about my daddy, and all the funny situations while planning church events, taking care of anybody and everybody who needed her, being concerned about my sister, my father, my cousin, all of my cousins. She actually thought all of my cousins were like her residual children, and she was concerned about them all the time, everything they did. It either drastically hurt her feelings, well, that was most of it, or made her super proud. But did she call and tell them? No. She would sit in the house and be like, I'm so proud of him. I'm so proud of her. My cousins were her babies. They may have never noticed it because my father was always the forefront, but man, that woman loved them. She loved those babies. I wouldn't name drop right now, but I guess I'll keep that to myself. There was 4 specific cousins that were her babies. They're older than me. You know who you are. If you're listening, my mama thought you were her older children, okay? Whether you talked to her or not. And when you did talk to her, she was on cloud 9. When you didn't talk to her, she was upset, okay? But we fast forward. Okay, this is all part of the shift of this story. We're going somewhere. Hang with me. That happens in 2015. She recovers. We do well. We take trips. We do things. 2019 was the last family trip we took. We were going to Tennessee, our favorite place. I was driving. My sister was going to fly in later. So I drove my parents. And Dad had gotten mysteriously sick. And we didn't know what it was. It's weird. They kept thinking it was pneumonia. It wasn't. Bronchitis. It wasn't. The flu. It wasn't. And we decided we're going to go anyways. It might be the last family trip we take. I don't know why we thought that. My mother was always a little bit dramatic. And so we did. And we got there and we tried. We went to the Bush's Bean Factory. We had lunch. We went to the hotel. We went one place and my father got sicker. We go to an emergency care facility. They say, it's just got to be pneumonia. His lungs are not doing too good. So we come back to the hotel and he's running a fever ridiculously. What does my mother do? She calls us girls in the room and says, girls, I know that God can deliver him from whatever this is. The doctors may not know, but he can recover. So we laid hands on him and we prayed for him. And in that trip, I have pictures of my mother taking pictures with me on the balcony and making silly faces with me and reminding me that we just have to trust. Dad had COVID. When we came back, the beginning of 2020, he was pretty sick. And my mother wasn't really able to be with him. She started having a lot of pains in her legs. And so she couldn't walk long distances. And so he had ended up in the hospital and she couldn't walk the hospital. And so it was on me. And I would go and I would sit in that hospital all day long and listen to the reports. I would come home and give her the reports. And she would say again, we just have to trust God. We know it's not his time. We have to trust God. I'm confident. Despite what it looks like. And yes, there was days that she freaked out and cried and said she didn't understand and then had to call in reinforcements because we all do. Text the masses, let them know there needs to be a prayer chain. Okay. My father recovered from the COVID, sort of. And we had shutdown, lockdown, as most of you did in this country or across the world. And we stayed home a lot. We talked a lot about our faith and a lot about different things. And of course, we decided to run a virtual church service. My mother came and played the organ. We were going to make it through. It was good. And then her legs hurt worse. Her body hurt worse. And she was getting sick a lot more. She had to have iron infusions, which she hated. But she still didn't want to give up. So in 2021-ish, we start seeking stronger medical help. Who can help us? What can we do to make my mother where she could walk freely without severe pain? Where she can go live her life. She wanted to go on a snowmobile really badly. She kind of thought she wanted to go skiing, but she was scared she'd break something, so snowmobiling felt better. She really wanted to do that. That was one of her goals. She really wanted to get into a smaller dress. She was always obsessed about her weight. And so we sought help. Many surgeons, many doctors, many exploratory tests. And there was a moment of hope. And then her foot started looking kind of weird in 2022. So she goes to the hospital. Now, I have not talked about this. at all. This portion of the story of my mother is pivotal in how I became the girl in the ashes. It kind of was the starting line, but I was really angry. I was in denial. And I don't know that this is the episode where we're going to talk about that hospital room, but we will. At first, none of us really knew how serious this was going to be. We saw the signs, we saw the decline, we could see the foot, the pain, the fear. We're in a hospital. All things I didn't understand. And if I'm being honest, I really do struggle to revisit this moment. I have a lot of regret. I have a lot of guilt. There are so many things that I wish I would have done differently, so many ways I wish I could have cared for her and loved her differently. What I didn't know then was that I was about to walk into a hospital room that would forever change the way that I understood prayer, miracles, faith. And that's where we'll start in episode 3. How did this visit, out of all the other things, become the one that shook every bit of my foundation? Ugh, I've been here before. The smell of a hospital, the tiled floors, the echo of your footsteps, the beeping sounds all around. I've been in this place way too many times. This one will be different though, right? It'll have a positive outcome,